Hi there, and welcome to the energy fuckery of the week starting on March 30th, all the way up until the 2nd of April. My name is Analia, and I will be your astrological translator for the fuckery that is the first week of April 2026, which, of course, is starting off at the end of March. So, Monday, March 30th, we're sort of trying to find our confidence underneath the family programs so that we can release the criticism we don't actually believe in anymore. It could be a bit of an emotionally chaotic disruption of a day. Okay, be aware of that. On Tuesday, the 31st, last day of March, Venus enters Taurus and sensuality, being present, liking the luxurious things of life, become a little bit more important to what we want in our relationship dynamics. And we're going to get to have a look at where the criticism that we have for our needs in nurturing or our desire to give nurturing, where do those criticisms of those two things, where do they come from? This is gonna be the moment on Tuesday that's gonna start helping us ask, is this an authentic requirement, desire, or need, or criticism of a need? Or is this just a reaction to an insecurity? On Wednesday, we're gonna find a way to share our beliefs, our weird, authentic, unconventional sometimes, those beliefs without fear of being dismissed or misunderstood or called a fucking weirdo, okay? The sun is going to light up where we criticize ourselves to dust before allowing people to even really see who we are. And it's gonna help us call out anywhere that our ego wants confidence so badly that it goes too far with it and it starts projecting out onto other people, and we become demanding of other people in our lives to give us the confidence that we should be giving ourselves. On Thursday, we are going to have a full moon in Libra at 1:11 p.m. Melbourne time, and that full moon in Libra is closing out a cycle that started with the new moon in Libra on October 22nd, 2025. And it is asking us to find balance by using calmness when we take charge. And to even in those moments where we have to be in charge, where we have to be calm, we also need to allow fleeting moments of fun, right? We might be in a hectic, volatile situation. That doesn't mean that another part of our life can't experience fun. This full moon does not want any of your outdated people pleasing tendencies. None of it. It doesn't want any of the ones that you learned from growing up, from your early relationships. We're in a new cycle, and this Libra full moon is here to show you where, if any, there are still some of those tendencies that need to be let go of. On Friday, we are in a bit of a spiritual space. We're sort of learning how to connect those inner thoughts, spiritual, emotional inner thoughts with that rational mind, with the mental and the physical components, and sort of learn how to bridge that gap between the spiritual and the physical. Because in doing that, we will also learn that that connection to us, to our spiritual and emotional wisdom, that actually helps our everyday lives feel more safe to take space up in. We stop putting ourselves into a little box as much. On Saturday the 4th, this is a massive energy day, okay? It is a really big day of having to overcome fears that have kept you from happiness, that have kept your happiness that you do get from being completely, fully, and 100% embraced in the moment. And Saturday is really going to help us highlight where we get in that temptation to chase a ridiculous, impossible dream. And we're sort of gonna learn where that temptation is actually just a distraction that is keeping you from achieving the dream that you can actually achieve right now. And we're sort of having to let go of these rejected truths that actually tell us the authentic path. Okay. On Sunday, the 5th, Saturn in Aries moves to 6 degrees, which is the first time that we have seen a 6-degree Saturn in Aries for about 30 years. And it is going to require us to successfully figure out a way or successfully manage both our everyday, how we do the work, what the collective manifestation of the physical world wants from us, right? The job with the weird hobby, with the weird part of us. And it really wants to light up where we get stuck in one or the other and why. Why do I get stuck in the weird hobby and I don't want to go out and do the real world thing? Where do I get stuck in the real world thing and I sort of don't want anyone to know about the weird hobby? Big week ahead. Let's get into it. March 30th. What have you got for us? We are starting out with that emotional disruption. That is happening, really kicking off first thing in the overnight aspect. So it's starting off with Venus making a semi-sextile to Uranus at 12:51 a.m. Happening at 28 degrees. We are really now coming up to the end of Uranus in Taurus. Uranus is going to move out of Taurus back into Gemini at the end of April. So this one is asking us a lot about our inner security. And 28 degrees is a Cancer degree, so it is related to the Jupiter story that we have been on. And it's trying to get us to really understand where in relationship dynamics do we look for that external nurturing when we haven't been able to create it inside of ourselves? And a semi-sextile aspect, it's asking us to keep our minds open to some of the ways in which that was shown to us. Now, where am I going to find that fucking information? Well, Uranus is about a 7 to 8 year cycle. So take a look over the last 7 to 8 years of your life about where there has been moments of chaos and disruption and how it is related to those themes of inner security, of needing nurturing, of needing to find a way to communicate that in your relationship dynamics and to also find a way to communicate that to yourself. Who are you and what do you need? And it is up to you to find an inner security. This is all kind of going to be happening within the same kind of window because when Venus and Uranus are meeting up at semi-sextile 28 degrees, the moon will move into a square with Uranus, and Uranus will also be at 28 degrees. So that's going to start around 4 a.m. Now, at the same time as the moon makes a square to Uranus, it's also making a trine to Venus because it's also at 28 degrees. So when we get to this 4 a.m. aspect, one of the things that we're going to be looking at is some inner friction. That inner friction that has been caused by really some perfectionism a little bit, from not being able to be seen as someone who requires inner security and nurturing. And it could have a lot to do with your outward reputation and how people are seeing you, because we are dealing with Leo and we are dealing with Taurus, and both of those two things do have a little bit of a component of that. One of the places that this is very likely to show up is going to be in your relationship dynamics, and it could have you really needing to look at how when that confident space is triggered, especially if it's triggered within a personal relationship, how that affects the way that you show up with your larger group of relationships, your friends, your teams at work, but how that inner security getting triggered, either for better or worse, within a relationship dynamic, what is the effect that that has on how you treat everybody else? If you're one or two special people, your very close personal relationships, if they're uplifting your need to have security about who you are, if they help you feel secure enough to show your creative self, what impact does that have on the way that you allow yourself to take up space in groups of people, in your friendships, in your teams at work? And Some of this is coming from really where we didn't have that security as a child. We look for it in a relationship dynamic, and we can sort of see the difference between, oh, I grew up with this and then I had this. Are they related? And it's helping us, especially with that paternal wounding, with the way that we experienced our father and how the space that we were allowed to take up within them, with our ideas, with our thoughts, how that has impacted how we are in relationships, which then impacts our friends, which then impacts how we are being seen and how people first see us rise up into the world. And we're going to move down this morning space, this biquintile to Saturn. And that's a 29-degree Leo. So that could feel like a bit of pressure. 29 degrees is a crisis degree. And it can make it feel like it's really important that this gets done. Like it's really important that this is understood, right? Now, when we have this happen again, it is likely to be in a relationship dynamic that we are experiencing this. Now, we are in this really strange energy because the moon will have gone void and it's asking to just sit with this feeling for a little bit. Just sit with it. What is it within this space where you can see structure and boundary from the past that needs to be let go of? And this is likely something that came from your childhood where you were not allowed to really express the fullness of who you are as a person. And you created these little boundaries and these little rules for yourself that we don't really need. We don't really need those now. So that's going to really be trying to show us how that has affected our ability to transform. It's going to show us where we still hold ourselves back when it comes to being out in public, being in a social space. And it's trying to help us understand that there are still parts of us in the shadow that don't need to be there anymore. And that's part of this whole new Saturn cycle that we're on. What are we pulling out of the shadow that we can use that we thought we needed to be scared of that is actually power? Moon's going to move into Virgo. Okay. And I like starting off the week with a Virgo moon. We are going to have to deal with that kind of void moon space. But by the time we get to work, just before 8 o'clock, and once we get to that Virgo moon and we starting off on a Monday, we're ready to work. We're ready to write the list. We're ready to put in the effort, what needs to be done in the physical world. And the first aspect that Virgo moon makes at around 8 a.m. is with Jupiter in Cancer, who is now direct. So that aspect is saying to us that there is something that needs to be let go of. So if we're starting off the Virgo list, what jobs need to be done? How am I being of service to my emotional space? And the service is really requiring you to look at the information that you've gotten about how you give service and nurture to yourself and to really understand that that's not quite accurate. That the way that you've been understanding that has been coming from programs that you really didn't need anymore. And it's just this reaction because that's how it always was when you were a kid. And with the moon in Virgo, we are ready to do the work, but it's going to be also showing us where we've felt a little bit incapable of making that transformation because that's how it's always been. And there's going to be a few little triggers coming in, maybe a trigger on your financial stability in your everyday life. It could show up as questioning whether or not you should take on an opportunity that might make your finances a little bit, will feel a little bit less stable. And it is helping us understand how the way that we are seen in the world, how the space that we take up in the world, how that affects our emotional self in regards to how much space we feel we can take up. And it's trying to change these things so that as we move into the future, we're not facing these walls that don't actually need to exist anymore. There's a part of this energy when we're moving through this Virgo moon that is going to require you to connect to your body, to your health, to your habits, to the routines that you go through every day, okay? So, the next aspect we get will be at 10:24, and that one is this quincunx with Neptune at 2 degrees. We wanna be able to see where adjustments need to be made in the way that we see our worth, so that we're not taking it into this new Neptune cycle. Neptune is at 2 degrees of Aries now and wants us to start feeling things out, being present with what our needs are, with what we are bringing into existence, right? Neptune is the idea space, and with Saturn in Aries moving through and Neptune moving through, and now it's at 2 degrees, we're really bringing it into that physical space. We're really, what does it smell like, feel like, look like? That aspect at 10:24 AM, it's trying to, if you let it, it's trying to trigger something that gives you a bit of information about where you've rejected truth that is actually quite transformative. So that could really come from conversations with your friends, or it could come with some emotions that come up in regards to your family space. So just keep your mind open to those sorts of adjustments. Where do you need to adjust your sense of worth so that you feel more comfortable taking up space? That's the overall. And then we're going to get to 12:40 p.m. and the sun's going to make a biquintile to the moon, right? Now the sun is looking for your values, your higher understanding of what it is that you want. And it's doing that by having you go through the information in the self-criticism filing cabinet. Okay, and it's going like, throw out these documents. We do not need these. These criticisms don't even align with what we would criticize anymore. Get them out of here. You've clogged up the whole self-criticism filing cabinet, throw it away. And then those aspects throughout that afternoon space around 4 o'clock with the moon at 5 degrees of Virgo, making a quincunx to Pluto and Saturn. So asking for adjustments in your shadow space and the discipline that you have from your childhood, where you weren't really allowed to make your own structures, make your own rules, enact your own karma. Making adjustments to these spaces. And look, 5 degrees, Leo degree. So there is a little bit of this fuckery that is leading us into being able to enjoy putting down these boundaries, being able to enjoy this little visit into the shadow space. So by the time we get to that 10:30 p.m. opposition to the node, which could feel like a little bit of pressure. It could feel like a little bit of pressure on making a decision, right? The moon at 8 degrees of Virgo, a Scorpio degree, it wants transformation, it wants exploration of a creative idea in a deep way, and it wants you to be able to really show that creative self, right? And we're in the emotional space. So it's like your emotions need to be able to accept those Scorpio components from that creative self, from that sexual energy. And, we don't want the Virgo part to repress it or criticize it. And when we do repress and criticize those energies, moving into the future, going towards the North Node becomes a lot more scary, becomes a lot more uncomfortable. And so this aspect could be very uncomfortable. And if you have an 8 degree Virgo, Pisces, Gemini, Sagittarius placement, you will really feel that. Okay. So the Gemini Sagittarius component to that, if you're around 8 degrees, that is going to be in a square. And that could really show up as like a complete change in the path that you are moving towards, or a complete change in some kind of routine or habit, wherever those Gemini Sag energies sit in your chart. The way that we do them might shift. The way that you see taking that energy into the future might change with that aspect. Okay. And that is the last aspect of the day on March 30th. March 31st, what have you got for us? Last day of the month, Venus moves to Taurus, and look, things get a bit less fiery in relationship dynamic. When Venus moves into Taurus, Venus loves Taurus. Taurus is ruled by Venus. They love each other. They want to hang out. They want to enjoy picnics outside, feeling the sun on their skin. They want a lot of touch. They want a lot of care, a lot of nurture. They want you to really be able to see them for all of the light that they have. Okay. So when Venus is in Taurus, you compliment everyone. Don't keep your compliments inside. You want to give someone a compliment while Venus is in Taurus? Go for it. Okay. That is the energy that will actually give you some nice little feels as well. So we start off March 31st with the sun making an in conjunction with the moon at 9 degrees. And this is where we're really seeing those values that don't align. We're really being asked to go on a bit of an exploration in a higher understanding, find my higher truth kind of way, and to make sure that we're adjusting as we go along. The more we learn about what we want, we have to adjust all these other parts in our life. So this one is saying, hey, you know how we're shining this sun on this new astrological new year and we're getting a higher understanding and we're moving through it and we're setting in our values what we actually want. In order to do that, we're going to have to also shift some of these emotional values, these emotional rules that we're holding for ourselves. We're going to have to move those. We're going to have to allow them to go with the flow. And then we move into this sesquiquadrate with Chiron. Now that's happening around 2 a.m. And when that happens, okay, we're going to have that energy happening in the fourth house in the sky. So wherever your Aries energy is in your chart, especially in your house system, that's really important on this one. That is the house that's going to be affected by this. Now that is trying to show you a pattern. That is trying to show you where you actually need to take responsibility for the criticism and really understand that that criticism is coming from the paternal wound, and it's coming from where the paternal wound, which is your father energies when you were growing up and the father's fathers, and it's really asking you like where that taught you not to take up space, or where that taught you what your legacy was going to be, or what working hard meant, or what being of service meant. And that was the only space that you took up in there. Like if you were told this is where you belong, giving service with this amount of thing and this is what you're supposed to do, we're questioning that now. We're seeing it. Now that could come through a trigger at work. So on the 31st, there might be a bit of a trigger at work that is kind of trying to light up your rebellion. Because when we get to 3 a.m. and we get a square to Lilith, and that's at 11 degrees. So that is really asking us to let the fucking weirdo loud and proud out of the bag. But with the moon in Virgo, it might be a little bit hard to do that because that Virgo moon wants you working. That Virgo moon doesn't want you having any big exaggerated emotions because what if somebody says it? What if I have to then think about it? What if I then need to criticize it? Okay. But this is really good, right? The moon is our non-negotiable emotional needs and desires, right? And Lilith is the emotions we don't want anyone to see, the rejected emotions, the guilt, the shame, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being wrong. Okay. And when she's at 11 degrees, it has got a lot to do with what you're giving back to the collective, how your authentic expression of who you are, how that helps the collective. And it wants you to really, she wants you to find a higher understanding of what that authenticity is. But of course, Virgo wants to keep to the list. So there's going to be a component of this that's going to be adjusting the way that you share information, especially your own boundaries with other people. It's going to show you where the father wound causes patterns, right? You get triggered, you communicate with someone, and then you get a bit of shame, or you're like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that, because you get a negative reaction. And then that sends you into a bit of a tailspin. It sends you into that tailspin of criticism. Why did I say that? I shouldn't have said that. Now everybody thinks that I'm worthless or stupid or whatever. Enter whatever judgment of self you put in there. Okay. So this square is trying to show you where you need to love and accept your authenticity, and you need to be stop trying to be so perfect, because what you actually need to be perfect at is the expression of who you are as a person. That's it. Who you are, that's it. We can't be perfect at anything else. We can only be perfect at that. That is the journey. And that's what Lilith wants. The Black Moon Lilith placement in our psyche, that is what she's about. And this could involve having to face some ego stuff, yeah? Because when we're dealing with Lilith, we're also dealing with a Priapus who is in the opposite position. So the moon will be squaring both of them, causing friction within the primal masculine and causing friction within the primal feminine. And we will be addressing ego and we will be addressing this search for truth and the repression of our true selves. And sometimes that comes out and projects on other people. Be aware of that. Not that maybe you will be the one projecting, maybe you will be, but somebody might project onto you. And then we get to 3 a.m., and this is where we are being told to let go of something we're keeping in the shadow, like let it out, let it be free. And then just before 6 a.m., we're going to have the moon make an opposition to Mercury at the Pisces degree, right? At 12 degrees. This is wanting us to integrate some information. This is wanting us to understand. This is wanting us to find out what we can do now with this information that we have gotten from the Mercury retrograde. What did you revise, reanalyze? What did you come across related to past traumas, especially traumas about communication, traumas from not being able to communicate, traumas from being gaslit, traumas from communication, and traumas around your idea. People not accepting your idea, being misunderstood, not being able to communicate your needs. This opposition to Mercury is going to be really loud about that. It's asking you to connect with your intuition so that you know how to explain it, right? It's also asking you to stop being so fucking judgmental when people don't understand you. It's not your job to do that. It's not your job to pick apart what needs to be said before you say it to make sure that someone understands you. That is not your job. And that's what we're learning here. And then when we get to about 10:40, we're going to see a pattern, right? Now, that is likely to show up in a relationship dynamic because the moon in Virgo is going to be talking to Venus, right? Newly entered into Taurus. So, what information does your emotional space have about the ways in which you allow yourself to be present in relationships now? And when your security is triggered or when you are emotionally triggered because you need to say something, what is the pattern that you go into? Where did that pattern come from? Okay. And that could be an emotional trigger in a relationship, okay? Because do keep in mind that we did start this week off, of course, with that emotional disruption kind of energy, and Uranus is still at that degree. So it is still in that kind of mother woundy, we need the inner security kind of energy. And then we move on to a really nice aspect, which is an 11:16 moon sextiling Jupiter. So once we get to this aspect, this could this could for some people, depending on where these energies sit in your chart, depending on how the last year of your life has been going, Virgo brings things into reality. Okay. So Jupiter in Cancer was retrograde until the 11th of March. And until that point, all of the work that we've been putting in, all of the healing that we've been doing, a lot of that wasn't going to be able to be seen until Jupiter went direct and Mercury went direct. And that is where we are now sitting. Mercury went direct on the 21st, Jupiter on the 11th. So now we're on the other side of that. When we get into this Virgo moon and it meets up with Jupiter, and they're going to have a little look at what they can show you you've already achieved. Right. And it will take some conscious effort. It's going to take some conscious effort of you looking at the information that you've got right now, right here. What part of that information is telling you that you've already achieved some things or that you're one step away from it? And in order to get that, in order to be able to see those things, we are going to have to let go of some of the mentalities that we got around what we're worthy of. We're going to have the moon at 19 degrees of Virgo, making a biquintile to Chiron, and really asking us to see in that very Virgo way, very discerning, look at the details kind of way, how how the paternal wound caused us to be in this place of self-criticism, especially with how we relate to other people, and we need to get rid of that. Then the last aspect of the day, which really, let's get to bed early. Thank you so much. 7:34 p.m. Nice. So that's gonna be the moon at 20 degrees of Virgo, Pluto at 5 degrees of Aquarius, and they're having a little chat. They're having a little chat. We're trying to transform something that makes us very self-critical. We're trying to let something out of the underworld space so that we can look at it, so that we can transform it. And that's how we end the day. I'd get to bed early if you can. Okay, April 1st. What have you got for us? I mean, it's April Fool's Day. I don't subscribe to that, so I'm not really open to any of that. I'm not. Nobody be sending me any April Fools. However, the day is a bit of a tricky one, right? The day, it's got some tricky energies to it. Okay, so we will have the sun make a trine to Lilith. That happens in the middle of the day, and as we move closer to that being exact, we're going to feel it. We start the day with the moon opposing Mars. That's at 22 degrees, which is a Capricorn degree. So we're at a really big take some responsibility here. Okay. Now, again, this is the moon at Virgo. This is Mars in Pisces. So Virgo Pisces placements, but also Gemini Sag placements. You might wake up ready to kill somebody. Just saying. Okay. Just saying. Because this is the moon, our emotional space, asking us to take responsibility for something that we are criticizing, for some kind of service that we are doing. And Mars at 22 degrees of Pisces is asking us to be responsible for how we are intuitively moving forward. And this is the moon in Virgo reaching out, sort of saying, hello, we would like to take some action from things that we've got on the list. And Mars saying, actually, no, I'm going to do what I feel. I'm gonna do the intuitive thing. Part of this aspect is also going to be saying, like, take responsibility for the times that you have escaped what your responsibilities are. So there could also be a little bit of shame, guilt kind of vibes coming up, right? Now, that could show up in relationship dynamics in the early morning. We might be projecting that into that space because it's likely that you're gonna question how much of yourself you wanna share, and it's like having rules around what you deserve, and whether they be egotistical, "I deserve the world for existing," or whether they be like, "I don't really deserve anything, I haven't done any work." That is the polarity, and the biquintile to Venus at 5 AM, it wants you to let go of that, right? Let go of all of those outdated beliefs, all of those outdated spaces. It wants you to, Venus in Taurus, be present. Be present with yourself and understand what your needs actually are and be able to communicate those and to not hide away from having to have that conversation. And we have to be making adjustments throughout that morning space as well to the Chiron placement, right? So whatever it is that we are letting go of, that we need to be a little bit more present about, that we have to take up more space in, we're going to have to make adjustments by understanding how our childhood has affected that. And then because we will have the quintile to Jupiter at 9:40, that is going to be helping us with some of the information we've collected from looking at our family spaces, from looking at the ancestry, from understanding the generational programs. And when we get to 11:30 and the moon trines Uranus at 28 degrees, this is going to be helpful because part of that energy is related to that Cancer energy of that aspect and to the Jupiter story. And it's looking at the last 8 years. And the good thing about having the moon in Virgo is that we can be a bit more discerning and we can open the filing cabinets and look at all of the things. And the trine to Uranus moves us into the quintile to Lilith before the sun shines on it. So we might be feeling around midday a bit of pressure, a bit of, it's the two sides of like wanting to dig your heels in and to not have to make any change and to just follow the list. And the quintile, because it's involving Lilith, is like, no, no. Let me in here. Let me bring some rebellion. Let me connect my primal emotional self to what we are discerning between, because that is how we can know that we're on the right path. But there could be a lot of pressure to criticize yourself or somebody else for being weird or different. Okay, be careful of that. Because when we get to the sun trining Lilith at 12:45, if you have criticized somebody else for them being a weirdo, you are going to see that in a very loud way, because the sun trine Lilith aspect, it wants you to be able to take your spiritual truth and set it free from the physical world around you and the structures and the rules that you've got about how you're allowed to be seen. And it wants you to be able to give that energy back to the larger group, to the collective, to your friends, to your partner, to the people that you're working with. And it really wants you to be proud of that rebellious, authentic, unconventional self. And it wants you to be able to really express all of your ideas, all of your beliefs. Not like, let's say them all at once, but it wants you to be able to say them whenever you feel the need to say them without fear of being dismissed, without fear of somebody telling you you're wrong. There's a really tricky balance that has to be taken when we're dealing with some of these energies. 11 degrees is Aquarius energy, and we have to remember that there is a part of the Aquarius energy that I like to call the spiritual God complex. And this is where you're unaware that you've got a God complex because you just know. So it's a level up from ego. It's like you can have whatever you want down there. I'm up here on the outside looking in. I'm not even gonna look at whether I've got an ego because I am the spiritual God. So of course I can't. It's where we block ourselves from seeing that. And so you need to be able to talk about your beliefs and do that without fear of being dismissed, but you also can't be doing that because you are the only correct person. And that is the tricky part. And that is why I said if you find yourself criticizing anyone in the morning of this day, before we get to that aspect, you will be shown where your spiritual God, where your ego took control. Okay. Be very careful of that, because the moon is going to go void and I'm not sure how long it's going void for, but let me check. So the moon will have gone void, we have just discovered, at just after midnight at 12:20 with the opposition to Mars. So we are sitting in this take responsibility energy all the way through. All of this adjusting, the moon is void. Okay, the moon is void, and it's gonna move into Libra at 1:51 PM. Okay? So while we're having this sun trining Lilith, the moon is void. So the emotional space becomes a little bit wonky. And actually, I think that that will be a good thing, because we are trying to look at the part that is the dark side of the moon. We are trying to look at that part, and I think it'll be helpful that the regular emotional space is a little bit wonky. Then the moon moves into Libra because she's getting set to give us a full moon on the 2nd, and her first little visit is 5:33 PM, when she is gonna meet up with Venus at 1 degree of Taurus. And of course, Venus is the ruler of Libra. So this aspect is kind of ruling itself. It's like asking for some adjustments to be made. Libra, we're making some adjustments to how I show up in this relationship dynamic and where I find my stability and how I enjoy things within it. And at 6 o'clock, we're getting the moon opposing Neptune. Now, if you are early degree Libra, Aries, Cancer, Capricorn, you will feel this. You will feel this. So that is really asking about how you see your value in relationships. It's asking, what is the value of a relationship? What is the value of you showing up as yourself in relationships? How has past patterns, generationally, ancestrally, because Neptune, how has that impacted your ability to balance out the relationship dynamic, the you and the I? The me and the you. How have you balanced that out? How have you maybe seen somebody as more worthy than you, or seen yourself as more worthy than them? Because part of this is going to be really triggering some past emotional shit that has come up from relationship dynamics. Because when we get this aspect at 6 p.m., we will have Neptune and Saturn are going to be up in the seventh house, and they're talking to the first house where the moon is. And so, this is what are your emotions and worth around how you allow yourself to be present in the relationship, and looking at information that you have gathered over past relationships of the past 8 years. What values and what contracts have you written about how much nurturing you allow yourself to ask for and require, and about how you allow your own authentic representation of what is fun for you? How have you decided what that looks like in a relationship dynamic? And so that's all about the past, right? Neptune is like, hey, look at these things. I'm dissolving these things. Let them go. Because as Neptune has dissolved and disconnected us from this past 160 years, we're still used to the pattern. Imagine one of those little ducks in water where it's like dip its little head down and it's going into the water. If you imagine that the past, these past programs, these past ancestral generational traumas are the little jug of water. They're the little cup of water that the little duck is going into, right? Now, the problem is that little duck, he gonna keep dipping his head in even when that is empty, because he's so used to the pattern of dipping that hasn't noticed that it's no longer got water in it. And that is kind of where we are with this Neptune cycle, right? We're like, we're in a lot of different parts of our lives, depending on where it all sits in your chart, but we're all doing a version of kind of dipping our head into this cup that's always been there, and we haven't quite noticed that there's no water there. And we're still doing the same pattern. We're still having the same reaction, but there's gonna be a moment of clarity, and there's gonna be moments where we're like, "Oh, there's no water in that. I don't actually need to bend down and dip my head in there anymore. Oh." And this moon opposition to Neptune, that's part of that story for us. That's gonna help us do that. And then we move down, we get to a 10-18, Venus making a semi-sextile, because now this is okay, well, the worth of your relationship needs to come into question here, or the worth of how you show up in the relationship, how you find yourself worthy of relationships. And it's asking you to keep a bit of an open mind about what you're going to find. And then we're getting to 1140, where the moon is going to trine Pluto at 5 degrees, which is a Leo degree. So when the moon and Pluto come together, this is where we want to be like free in our mind to dream, right? We want to be able to understand that our inner space, our inner imagination space, what we dream of, what we visualize, we have to help them find a physical space. We have to bring these ideas out into the physical space. And it's this realization that the moon and Pluto want us to have, that whatever we're visualizing in our heads, whatever we're imagining, whether it be negative or positive, that that becomes sort of a creative goal in the physical. So if you're imagining like that you're never going to achieve something, or that something is going to fail, we need to start realizing the power that our imagination has. I mean, Neptune is in Aries and Saturn is in Aries. So the ideas are coming out into the physical. If we are not focused on visualizing and imagining ourselves with creative goals, with positive outcomes, and we're only focused on the negative, then that is what comes out. So this moon trining Pluto, it's the moon and Pluto, so it's the emotional space and it's the underworld, and they're both in air signs. So they're tossing around all of these ideas. And we wanna be able to balance. Yes, Libra, we wanna be able to balance. But one of the things that both Libra and Aquarius energies can get themselves stuck in is spiraling down the negative path, because as they try and gain and find as much information as they can, Gemini can do this too, but a little bit less likely to. Libra needs to balance, and it's got a really hard time doing that, right? It's got a really hard time balancing what it actually wants versus what it thinks other people should want, right? And Aquarius, it wants to find all of these ideas, but of course it has a bit of a spiritual god complex to it. So we need to remember that it's okay to collect a lot of information. It's okay to find out different pieces at different points, but to be stuck in a negative mindset, to be stuck in visualizing only negative outcomes, we're kind of in a world now where you are going to see that in front of you. The power of our mind is really important to recognize now, okay? And that is the energy of April Fool's Day. April 2nd. What have you got for us? Full moon in Libra, baby. That's what you've got for us. I actually think this full moon is gonna be really nice. It is having a little bit of fuckery before we get to it, but I think it's gonna be really nice. I think it wants to show us mostly where our people pleasing has fucked off. But if you're someone who's held on to that, you're gonna be living a different story, okay? So we're starting off with the moon opposing Saturn at 5 degrees. So that energy, that's your emotions in an air sign, and that is your daddy discipline in a fire sign. That is justice in the moon and a warrior in the karma. So this opposition, and it will be playing off that energy from the day before, where if you have really criticized someone for being authentic or being different or being weird, and then you were in your head about it, this is the aspect that sort of makes you feel a bit bad about that. This is like a bit of a pressure cooker kind of moment. And as we kind of move towards that moon, it doesn't get any easier. And it sort of wants us to really be aware that this sort of energy, we need to be careful not to explode it onto anyone else, that we just need to understand it as we move through it. Okay. So this opposition to Saturn, 12:25 AM, just after midnight. I mean, you might be asleep, but you also might be out fighting with someone. And one of the components of it being at 5 degrees, a Leo degree as well. So there is a bit of extra fire added to that Aries, and there is a bit of fire added to that Libra. Fire and air, baby. And so we need to be aware of that, that this is very fiery and it wants to put down its own boundaries. And sometimes when we were dealing with a 5 degree, we're also dealing with, like, maybe we're being a bit exaggerated because we were powerless to put these boundaries down as a child, or we were powerless to be able to really communicate our emotions. And so now I'm going to stomp my feet and I'm going to be heard. And so that is where that pressure cooker energy comes from. And then as we move into that 618 aspect, that quincunx to the node, that's trying to make some adjustments. It's trying to make some adjustments in how you balance your emotional space and how you allow yourself space in your emotions, right? You're not just hearing other people's and then reacting and allowing them to see the side of you that you think best fits with how they are emotionally reacting. And then when the moon makes a sextile to Lilith, there's 11:30, and it's likely that this aspect is gonna feel a bit wild, okay? Because the moon in Libra at 11 degrees, it wants to communicate authentically. It wants to be a little bit strange and fun. Libra energy is a little bit fun anyway, and this kind of can add a little bit more fun to it. And it's helping us see something from a different perspective. And both Libra energy and Sagittarius energy can do really well seeing something from a different perspective. So this is where Lilith really wants you to connect with your authentic, weirdo, wild self. And the moon in Libra is trying to balance that out, and they're having a little exploration of each other in how they do that. And and that could feel really nice in a relationship dynamic that is quite fun. Being able to just enjoy a moment of weirdness, just to be able to, and even that could just be with yourself, but just to be able to and just enjoy a moment that you maybe would have felt embarrassed to enjoy at an earlier point in your life, okay? So then at 1:11 p.m. Melbourne time, the sun makes its opposition to the moon at 12 degrees of Aries. And the sun is doing that from our very public life, from our very obvious social reputation, okay? And right next door to the sun, a few degrees away is Saturn. Just keeping having a little check-in, just making sure. I'm just here making sure that you are sticking to these boundaries. And it's gonna be obviously the Sun and Saturn are in opposition with the Moon over the other side, and the Moon is in our most private self. It is in the part of us that is where we want to feel secure and safe, and it's in the part of us that does not want us to show anybody that part. And so a Moon in Libra is we are really trying to, with this aspect, integrate the way that we've gotten rid of these people-pleasing tendencies. Your inner security should have nothing to do with how the outside world sees you, and that is part of what this moon is trying to show us, and it could have some impact on both of those things, your social reputation, your work, and also your private self. The sun in Aries at 12 degrees, it does need a bit of self-restraint. And it doesn't really want that. It wants to be able to say what it wants to say. But the moon in Libra is like looking for somewhere to use its imagination, somewhere to play around in its thoughts, somewhere to be creative. And there is a risk of not seeing a serious issue as a serious issue. The sun is right there next to Saturn, but the moon down there in our little private space wants to have a bit of a fun time. And so there could be this risk of maybe you're not seeing a serious situation as serious. Maybe people are feeling like you're reacting to something quite serious as a bit of lacking a bit of depth. And where you say the thing in a relationship dynamic that you think is a fun thing to say, but it doesn't actually add anything to the conversation or the seriousness or the substance of the conversation in the relationship. And that this is that moment that I mentioned at the start of this episode, that balance needs to be found. Balance needs to be found by sitting in a calm space and taking charge of whatever the volatile situation is. But that doesn't mean that you can't have fun. That needs to be the balance, that you're somebody who, in a moment of a serious volatile situation, which with Saturn and the Sun very close together in Aries can bring up, especially in a social space, especially at work, that there needs to be a calmness to that, but that calmness doesn't have to impact the rest of your existence. It doesn't have to shake you from anything that was fun. And this is, I think, where a lot of people get stuck in this idea of like only thinking that you only are able to be in one moment. If I'm in a moment of sadness, then I need to not show anybody that I've got joy behind that. But that's not true because we can feel both sadness and joy at the same time. There's just a way to balance that so that the effect that it is having on that collective isn't one that is emotionally irresponsible, because we are responsible for our emotional reactions, and Libra really cares about that. This is where that Libra moon, it is feeling a bit more confident, right? It's at an Aries degree now, and it wants to be able to take up some space. Now, that sesquiquadrate quadrant to Uranus, of course, is showing you now that we're in a bit more of this confident energy, it's like, hey, go and have a look back over the last 8 years at how some of this chaos triggered you. And again, it's likely to be chaos that showed up at work. It's chaos that showed up in your money situations and your legacy energy. It's even where it might have showed up where you didn't feel secure at work or you didn't allow yourself to feel secure. And it could also really be trying to show you like where that insecurity at work gets triggered and how you then make yourself small and you make your needs small and you make your voice small. And in doing that, you are emphasizing these patterns that you got from trauma experiences. And this sun shining so bright and wanting to have you really understand the people pleasing tendencies. All the way back in October, we planted some seeds about really letting go of people pleasing tendencies so that we can start to learn ourselves. And that's sun opposing the moon at the full moon. That's what it was trying to show you, where you have done that, where you haven't done that. And this sesqui quadrant is like a little bit of a test. It's like being triggered in that same way where you would normally go into some sort of people pleasing and to be able to say, oh, fuck, no, I'm not doing that anymore. And then that 539, that biquintile to the node, that's where we let that go, right? That's where we let go of this kind of energy around fearing not being stable, fearing not being seen in our highest representation of us or whatever that needs to look like, and the emotions attached to that. And so 5:55 p.m., that quincunx to Mercury, 14 degrees Taurus degree. We're sort of trying to find where like illusions of reputation, illusions of stability that are all external, that those things really don't have any place. Mercury in Pisces was showing us that as well. Part of the Mercury in Pisces retrograde was showing us that, where we need to intuitively understand who we are, not this external reputation energy. And so with Libra moon now coming in with the Mercury in Pisces, this is going to help us really see like those people pleasing tendencies really do have to be gone so that we can trust our intuitive self. And from that, we do get to find some stability. Then at 8 o'clock, the moon is going to square Jupiter. All right. So the moon's going to be in the 12th house when it's squaring Jupiter. And that's their subconscious space. So now we're taking this information that we've gotten from this like people pleasing little trip and we're throwing it around and trying to understand, firstly, how and where we got those values from your family, right? Jupiter and Cancer. It's definitely come ancestrally, generationally from your family, very likely to do with the maternal nurturing energies around you. These are where these values came from about people pleasing. And one of the things that it wants us to do is really make some adjustments to where communication needs to be a little bit more stable, that maybe it can be now because we have overcome some traumas, but it is going to be in this opposition still, like moving away from with the sun, and it's getting triggered by a moment of fate, but that's likely to show up in your everyday life. And it's getting triggered. Some of you are going to be triggered with a health concern. You might get triggered with a health concern. Be aware of that. Be very careful with your body around full moon times, okay? And this is really needing to understand how the only real way to ensure that you are criticizing, judging, looking at, determining things about yourself, figuring out what it is that you want, how much space you need to take up. That all has to come from an understanding within yourself first. Yes, it will eventually have to see how it reacts to the collective, how it reacts in a relationship, but all inner security has to come from self. So having the moon in the 12th house in the sky, showing us this information that we've been coming through, that this moon wanted us to see, and helping us make these adjustments to the mentalities that make us go into people pleasing tendencies. And then we get to this aspect where the moon squares Jupiter exact. And it's causing friction in those family values. And it's really asking you to stand up for yourself and that it's okay to be the weirdo. Like, you need to transform your ideas of what being the weirdo is, because most of us have been told that being a weirdo is the wrong way to be, and this Libra energy clings onto that in very people-pleasing ways, and that is what it wants to get rid of. And as you can see on the zodiac wheel, all of that energy is in the 6th house. All of that energy is in the 6th house relating to your body, your physical self. Be careful. That is the sort of energy that triggers things to go down in the physical world around you, with your body, with your health, depending on what your chart looks like. So during that square to Jupiter, one of the things that I would advise is I always was going to write it down because I'm a Virgo, but there is a part of that that now you need to confront some of these values from your family. And I always find writing them down. Write the values down that you were taught that are related to people pleasing and look at them. Look at them written down. Libra values words as well. 15 degrees is a Gemini degree. There's a big value around that. And writing them down and actually seeing them can help you understand. It can help you understand what they were actually about. April 3rd, what have you got for us? Bit of an annoying adjusting kind of day. There is gonna be an opposition to Chiron in the afternoon, which it could have you in your feels, and then Mercury will try and Jupiter by the end of the day. So we are in a bit of a well, at least we're moving into, but mostly throughout this day, we are in a bit of a haze. A bit of a spiritual kind of haze. We're starting off this 6:21 a.m. bi-quintile to Mercury. So the moon at 21 degrees, looking for truth, searching for truth, truth-seeking degree, and Mercury at 15 degrees. I've got your information. Which of it's truth? So this is where we need to let go of any ideas that we have that don't allow us to understand both logic and spiritual, right? Mercury wants is the mental component. It wants you to be able to think clearly, but Pisces is intuitive. Pisces is not about logical communication. So this is where we have to be able to be the middleman between the logical and the spiritual. And so there are gifts to be found when we can do that. So this aspect at 6:21 could really have us searching for truth about that sort of intuitive information through potentially having to relive some like emotional memories from relationships, or maybe having a moment of clarity in your current relationship. And when Venus makes the quintile to Jupiter, like less than an hour later, that's going to help us communicate in that space. We kind of are having this I need to let go of some kind of truth that was related to people pleasing so that I can connect intuitively so that then I can communicate that. And then at 7:09, Venus, 3 degrees, Gemini degree, finds a bit of stability in being able to communicate and finds a nice way to be able to communicate it. And that sort of will help out the people pleasing, but it will be coming in with some information that is trying to show you where a gift or a skill or a talent or something that would make you feel good about yourself can actually be found if you let go of these barriers between the spiritual and the physical. And a lot of people who struggle connecting to their spiritual self will actually find that creativity is a great door. So, with Venus in Taurus, this could be a moment of really using something creative in order to be able to communicate a bit more comfortably. And then when we get to 9:18, that's where that moon is saying, okay, well, let's take a bit of responsibility now and look at that last 8 years and let's throw out some of this nonsense. We don't need, let's be responsible for the people pleasing. Let's look at the past 8 years of where that didn't work out for us. And let's see where we were triggered into a pattern of it and how that became who we thought we were. And if we thought that we were this people pleasing person, just, whatever you wanted to call it, I'm a kind person, I do kind things for people, but it was actually people pleasing, but you sort of made it part of who you were as a person because you thought that that was the right thing to do. And how does that make you feel about your choices in the future? And can you make them? And do you trust yourself moving into the future? Because this 10:49 a.m. sesquil quadrant is saying, well, when this gets triggered, when you feel like you're a weirdo or you're not putting other people first, it does make you fearful of this unknown space. Or you are fearful of this unknown space of having to put yourself first and trust your intuition with your needs because of the people pleasing tendencies. Okay. So then 1 p.m., quincunx to Mars. Now we're sort of in an integration energy because 24 degrees is a Pisces energy. So we're looking at everything that we've learned from that Libra moon and we're integrating it into finding a way to adjust the way we move so that it takes into account both the logical and also the spiritual. And so that is going to cause a bit of fuckery in all of the ways that you have stuck to the childhood wound. Chiron getting activated at 3 p.m. Now, this opposition, again, if you have a 25-degree-ish around that and you are Libra, Aries, Capricorn, Cancer, you're going to feel it. Capricorn, Cancers, this is going to feel way more hectic than it's going to feel for Libra, Aries, because you are getting squared by it, baby. And squares cause a hell of a lot of inner friction. And this one is about the father wound. Libras, especially. Libra sun, especially. Libra sun people, you carry the father's heart. And that means everything from the physical problems of the father's heart and also the way that he used the heart in a loving capacity. So you will be feeling this opposition to Chiron, especially if you have a late degree Libra placement, because as your sun, because there's a huge component of it, Venus as well, that is related to that, how much space I'm allowed to take up, right? And you inherit the way that you see the world through the way that your father's heart experienced the world. And that could really be bringing up a little bit of guilt for not allowing yourself space. It can also be showing you that all you had to do was look at the value system, that all you had to do was understand how to communicate what you needed to say. And look, I'm not saying it would have been easy, because these are the sort of wounds where you get given so much proof that it's pointless, that no one wants to hear it, that it's wrong, that it's very hard to come up against that. You think you've collected all of this evidence, but in reality, we're in a new world and your evidence doesn't mean shit over here. And these kinds of aspects, that's the whole point of them. This will be the aspect of Chiron reaching out from your inner value system, from a higher understanding of self, and like trying to pull you towards it, really trying to get you to understand how the way that you feel about how much communication you're allowed to give about what it is that you need, how that feeling comes from a deep wounding that affects your inner value system, especially about your worth. And that aspect then moves on to this semi-square to Lilith, because of course, if we want to be able to take up space, if we want to be able to feel secure and stable within who we are as people, we have to keep an open mind to the dark side of our emotions that are going to come up and show us exactly what their truth is. And then at 8:58 p.m., the moon wants to then make some adjustments to this place in our psyche that actually can evolve, the Uranus placement, the disruptor. And at 28 degrees, it's almost done. We're almost done. So this is where we get to see the tiny little adjustments that we have made. Where in the last 8 years did I people please, and where the fuck am I not doing that again? Okay. And so last aspect of the day, 10:28 p.m., Mercury making a trine to Jupiter at 15 degrees. And Jupiter's nearly done at 15 degrees. So we are nearly done going over and over all of this information, okay? Going over and over the information of nurturing from the generations before us, from the ancestors before us. The overthinking component is almost done. And so when these two meet up, what we're trying to do with it is use that Mercury in Pisces, that intuitive information, and look at that family space of information and try and draw some lines, try and figure some shit out. There could be a component of this that gets triggered by something emotional in a friend group, and that makes you have to make some changes with how you're showing up. So somebody, in a friend group might be feeling quite emotional because at the time of this aspect, when Mercury trines Jupiter, the moon will be void. I would imagine it goes void in the afternoon with that opposition to Chiron. It'll be at 29 degrees of Libra, right? And that can really put a lot of pressure on the relationships that we have and the emotions attached to that. So at the same time that Mercury is trining Jupiter, it's also trying to show us that when this heightened emotion is triggered in a friendship situation or a group people situation, even for some people, it could be an online group that when this gets triggered, it reminds us of trauma that we have around trying to communicate and not being understood, or trying to communicate and being put back in our box, and how that information, we got that from how we grew up. We got that from the family that we grew up in, and that is not who we are anymore. And as we keep removing these filters and these layers underneath that sort of stuff, these programs, we actually start to be able to really take control of our more primal needs, and we can bring them forward. But this aspect could be a bit of fuckery going down in your family space because it's trying to transform what that looks like in the future for you, okay? Great point of time for anyone who has a dialogue or a communication with their spirit team, especially if they are ancestral. That's a really nice aspect to be out under, asking for some support, okay? April 4th, what have you got for us? I mean, you win. April 4th wins as the most fuckery. This moon in Scorpio is very transformative, okay? I'm gonna try and go through these aspects as quickly as I can, but there is a lot to them. So we start off at 1:15 AM, right? And the moon makes a sesquil quadrant to Mercury. And so the moon will be in Scorpio at this time. So it is wanting some deep connection with self. It wants your sexual energy. It wants your creative energy. It wants you looking at betrayal, guilt, shame, all of these things. And so this sesquil quadrant is saying, like, when that gets triggered, when your ego self gets triggered with some kind of guilt or shame, you go into some kind of pattern that really shuts down how you communicate, that there's no security in what I'm communicating. And this is really saying that there is a pattern that you can actually be letting go of now. And that pattern has something to do with how much you allow yourself space when it comes to taking action on things that have caused a negative emotional experience or have caused trauma, and how that's related to the child. So 2:18 AM, we get a semi-square to Uranus, and that is the sun at 13 degrees, an Aries degree of Aries. And it's really the I am, and I'm gonna see it. And we get to look back at this last 8 years of Uranus in Taurus, and what we're trying to see is whatever we can leave behind that doesn't let us shine our light as us. Look at the chaotic times and how those chaotic times made you put part of yourself away. That's what we wanna be looking at. And, we know that we are making adjustments. 3:40, we get the quincunx to Neptune because Neptune's like, bitch, I am not taking all of this weird guilt, shame, betrayal energy that you think affects your worth as a person. We are not taking that. No. Make some adjustments to that. It can also bring up a lot of feelings about being not trusting someone that you share resources with as well. That make sure you're looking at that as well. If you're someone who really gets into these energies with your birth chart, have a look at where Scorpio 2 degrees sits in your house system, and that'll give you a bit of an idea of where that's being triggered for you. The moon opposition to Venus at 5 degrees. So the moon will be opposing Venus, squaring Pluto, and Venus and Pluto are squaring. So this is creating a little bit of a triangle situation. So right there in the morning space, how fun is that? What the fuck does it want? Well, the moon and Venus in their little opposition, they're trying to show you where that temptation to go above and beyond and to reach for something that's almost impossible, where that is a bit of an escape. And that's the idea, because we're dealing with Venus. This is like the big over the top extreme. This is when I'll know I'm in a perfect relationship. So trying to get to that, right? Now that could also be showing up for people, not relationship, but for a job. Like, I'll know I'm successful when I am king of the company with a golden chair and people are raining money down on me. That is the escape goal. That's not a thing for most people. So the moon and Venus coming together are showing us where we overinflate what we think would make us feel successful or like we've achieved the thing, where we overinflate that, where we make that the biggest thing, and it stops us from being able to see what is actually realistic to achieve right now. Maybe it's one step and we achieve this thing right now, but why would I do that when I'm never gonna get the big golden chair? So it's really showing us how if we start like focusing on these big, over the top, exaggerated, I'm gonna win gold, we move too fast into that future space and we're not here in the moment. We're not here with ourselves. We're not here at home with ourselves saying, actually, you know what? I can take this and I can do this and I can do that. Now, that square to Pluto, that's going to help us understand the mask, the smokescreen, the haze, the illusion that is veiling the actual truth. Like, why don't I want to look at what I can achieve right now? Why would I rather look at this other situation? And the Venus and Pluto together, they're going to help us do that because Pluto is going to help us see the dark side. Taurus energy at the surface. So it doesn't want to come down deep. But when it meets, but because it's meeting up with Pluto, Pluto gonna take it down deep. So that's gonna really be helpful. And it's showing us that the way that we navigate that situation of I'm gonna go and try and get this big golden thing, and that's taking me away from the actual reality of what I can achieve right now, or sometimes what I've actually achieved right now, I'm not gonna see that as good because I haven't got the golden chair, and that becomes the illusion, this idea of, "Well, I haven't got that thing, so there's no point. If I can't get it done perfect with gold, then why am I even trying?" And you might be one step away from achieving something quite great in your life, right? Now, the where, why, and how of it is what is that smoke screen made of? What is that illusion made of? Why is it there? Why am I putting it there? And this access to Pluto that Venus will have is going to help drag it down into the underworld, but allow it to see that from a different perspective because Pluto is in Aquarius. And it's gonna help show us that when we allow these past mentalities of like self-betrayal or self-failure or feeling guilt or shame for not achieving something, when we allow that to give way to anxiety about what happens if I don't achieve it, what happens if I haven't achieved enough and people are saying that I haven't achieved enough and I haven't worked hard enough, that underlying untrusting betrayal kind of energy that creates this anxiety, that is why the smokescreen, the delusion, the I'm going for gold comes in. Because if we're focusing on something that we know is impossible, then we don't have to look at what's right in front of us. And so we need to focus on having this solid connection with our reality, with what we can actually achieve, so that, yes, from here, I can see what I've achieved, but I can move forward towards a bigger goal without feeling like that's unachievable. We have to achieve the small thing to feel like we can achieve the big thing. And if we focus on the big thing, it becomes this overwhelming, anxious, I'm never going to get it. But if we take small steps, if we achieve the one small thing, we don't have to be constantly looking out for what it is that's coming at us to ruin this ability of us to get the big gold, right? Now, that's one of the overarching energies throughout this whole fucker of a day. Now, at the time that this moon square Pluto square Venus is happening, Venus is going to be trying to bring up things around our physical life. She's in Taurus. She's going to be near the ascendant when this happens. And so this is our everyday life, trying to see the beauty, trying to see the work, the results, the reward that we've already got in the everyday life. But having these feelings of betrayal and distrust and worried about being seen and judged, that's coming from how we've had that sort of shit happen in the past, right? It's coming from where we've tried to share those sorts of things and we've dealt with kind of betrayal energy. And one of the questions that it's bringing up is, did you have some boundaries set for yourself around that? Did you understand? And so we're going to start, what do I need to adjust so that I don't go into this escape from the actual reality? Okay, what do I need to adjust? I need to understand what I need to feel safe and secure and happy. And I need to explore a little bit of how some of my criticisms came from my family space and I don't actually agree with them. And if I can change some of those things, and if I can understand that I don't need to feel betrayed or feel judged or feel like exposed in a negative way If I don't have to feel those things, then I feel much more comfortable showing up as myself, as who I am, looking at what I have, and rewriting the values around those sorts of things. And then we move through this day having to adjust those boundaries, having to let go and transform some of these betrayal mentalities, these shame guilt mentalities, in order to feel more comfortable to move into a much nicer place. And Venus will biquintile Lilith around 6:30 at night. And that's, again, that is really asking you to just look at where you are standing right now. See what is stable, see what you enjoy, see what is pleasurable, and lean more into that and stop rejecting the things that you like, that you enjoy, that make you feel free. Stop rejecting them because you're worried that someone's going to make you feel guilt and shame about it, that someone's going to misinterpret why you enjoy those things, that you enjoying those things is going to have a negative effect on your reputation, on how people see you. Those things, we need to be letting go of them. And there's likely to be another trigger coming up at around 8:15 p.m., something that does trigger betrayal energies, something that does have a secret coming out. And it's likely that when that trigger happens, we then look at how much we allow our intuitive motivation to lead the way. That it could come the other way around, like somebody being manipulative about how much space you should take up, trying to tell you how much space you should take up, trying to create an illusion around you so that you can't see your own needs, and that trigger, that sends you into some kind of self-betrayal energy. So those are the 2 ways that that could be showing up. Depending on where those energies sit in your personal birth chart will show you the area of your life that that is showing up in. And we get to 9:43 PM, we're 10:09, 10:39. These guys are all kind of connected. Mercury is looking for really an inner security around trusting your intuition. And the moon and Lilith are meeting up at 11 degrees in Aquarius degree at the same time that the moon is biquintiling Saturn as well. So this is where it's like you keep your open mind to the things that are deep down in your primal self, in your requirements for freedom. You need to keep an open mind about that because there are restrictions, boundaries, structures that you have in place that need to be let go of because they do not belong to you anymore. And then at 11:46 PM, Venus makes a semi-sextile to Saturn and says, "Bitch, you best to keep your open mind while we input some of these new things." And really, that one is saying, don't allow these outdated structures and beliefs and criticisms of self, don't allow them to impact your good time. Don't allow them to impact the pleasure that you can have. And we go back to that idea of like, how am I allowed to feel joy and sadness at the same time? How am I allowed to feel these two differing emotions at the same time? And it's sort of about just being present with where you are. And that's the last aspect of the day at 11:46 PM. April 5th, what have you got for us? Look, this one's not too bad. It is gonna have us really needing to let go of what we thought was truth. That was really just kind of a bit of self-betrayal, kind of a bit of guilt and shame. All right. So we're starting off 12:58 AM, Mars making a semi-sextile to Chiron because Mars is now at 25 degrees. And of 25 degrees of Pisces, Mars here is saying we're moving intuitively now and we're taking up space there. And I don't really care what your childhood wound taught you. Let that go. Semi-sextiles, keep your mind open to what you're seeing and what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. And because we're dealing with Mars in Pisces, go and be intuitive, not going to be super obvious. 3:32 AM, the sun makes a quincunx to the moon. Now, 14 degrees. So that's a Taurus degree. It can be a little bit stubborn. So we've got 14 degree, Taurus degree, stubborn, Aries is stubborn, Scorpio is stubborn. So this is a very stubborn energy that is asking for adjustments, which can be quite difficult. So you might have some interesting dreams during this time, or you might literally be awake because that moon trine Jupiter next, that's going to be quite loud as well. So these adjustments that are being made is the sun in Aries lighting up these things that you actually should be able to see about yourself. Because Taurus degree, let's look at where you physically are. Let's look at what you want. Let's look at the worth. Let's look at the stability of your home, of your work, of your money. Let's look at all of these things from the I am Aries perspective. And when we're doing that, we're going to also then need to make some adjustments to how we understand the difference between staying on the surface and deep understanding, between how I work every day and this need for long-term abundance. But I need to be making these adjustments from this point of view of me. What do I want? How does that align for me? What is my number of hours that I work, of money that I make? What is my number? And 5:42 a.m. Moon trines Jupiter. Jupiter at 16 degrees. We're done, my friends. We're done with the Jupiter at 15 degrees. And now we get to move into 16 degrees, which is a Cancer degree. Now that we have some internal stability, how do I now move around it externally? How do I now take these emotions that used to be related to betrayal and guilt and shame, and how do I help them find security now that I have this inner security, right? How am I now secure to show my emotional space? How am I now secure to be able to deal with feelings of guilt or shame? And this information that Jupiter has been giving us, we're finding some security in it. We're settling down into it. And we're able to now really see that we are building our own idea of what it is to feel secure and nurtured within ourselves so that betrayal doesn't affect our security with who we are as a person. All right. Now at 8:17 a.m., we're gonna be seeing some kinda ego patterns or some patterns where you repress your own expression of who you really are. 17 degrees is a Leo degree. And so in the same way, when we had the sun and the moon at 14 degrees of Taurus, we have got Scorpio, axis of possession, Aries, axis of identity, 17 degrees Leo, 2 degrees Taurus. A lot of stubborn energies here. This is all fixed or cardinal energies, and they think they know what they know. And so this is where we're trying to see where our guilt and shame gets triggered, when our ego is affected, when we try and show something about ourselves and people don't accept it, and then we feel guilt and shame around it, and then we hide it, and then we don't want to show it to anybody else. And Neptune is like, no, bitch, no. We're not taking that. Let's look at this pattern. Let's see where you get triggered. Let's figure this out. We're not taking that with us. Where do we need to reconnect to our emotional truth in order to be able to creatively express ourselves? And if you want to know the worth of who you are moving forward, what is the worth of me, you have to let go of anything that stops you from connecting with your intuitive self in a way that you believe that it's time to share that part of you. So at 8:24, when the moon trines Mercury, they are talking about the same thing. So there's a pattern, and when Mercury moves in, this is now saying that someone might trigger that pattern by saying something a bit egotistical, saying something to convince you of some kind of illusion. This could also be calling someone out on their bullshit. And maybe you wouldn't have said something in the past because you were worried about feeling shame. What if I'm wrong? And this moon trine Mercury, we're not going to feel that way. There's a lot of confidence behind this. Whatever needs to be said needs to be said. And then 3:41, so we move into the afternoon for the next aspect. So we're going through that day really feeling quite good about how we're communicating and probably finding out a lot of secrets, probably busting through a lot of illusions. And the 17 degrees Leo degree, that's the sun shining into all these illusions, shining into all of the ways in which others and ourselves have kind of manipulated information in order to feel certain ways, in order to feel betrayed, in order to feel like we can't trust anyone, and how we've manipulated those things because of past traumas, and how those past traumas manipulate all of that internal space. And so at 3:40, the sesquil quadrant, the moon at 21 degrees, which is a Sagittarius degree, is looking for truth. Truth in the dark spaces, Scorpio. Truth in the betrayal, Scorpio. Truth in the guilt, the shame. What are you trying to tell me? What do I need to understand here? And this is when Saturn has entered 6 degrees of Aries. So has moved out of 5 degrees, is now in 6 degrees. Saturn at 6 degrees, this is the degree where we need to be okay with the disciplined worker version of us, and we need to be just as okay with the weirdo habit that we have, the weirdo habit or hobby that we do at home, where we need to find balance in between those 2 things. And so it's balance in between the physical and the weird little habit, the work and the weird habit. There's the social us and the private us. And it wants really the overall is the spiritual and the material. And that in order for us to be able to integrate and understand how the spiritual and the material work together, we have to put some protections, some boundaries around how we allow somebody else to affect the thing that we like to do. That this is the like, what do people say? Don't yuck somebody's yum. What boundaries do you have around leaning into those feelings of not letting someone yuck your yum? Saturn at 6 degrees is asking for those boundaries, and it's the sort of boundaries that you would want to put up around a child. Thinking about the sort of little fun games that children play, and if you are a parent, it's a little bit easier to do this, but thinking about what sort of protections would you want in place so that nobody shuts down the imagination of your child? That's what Saturn at 6 degrees is having us do. It's having us build these boundaries around things that we love, around things that we enjoy doing, so that nobody can affect the way that we feel about it, so that we don't repress what it is that we actually want to do, and we don't stop doing the weird thing that we actually love to do. And so while we've got the moon trying to show us some kind of pattern that we go in, that is the part of us that emotional part of us that is it's trying to build the protection. We're protecting the child, we're protecting the innocent habit, we're protecting the space that the creativity comes out of. And with the sun there, it really brings this light to being able to see synchronicities that can line up between those 2 things, the weird hobby and the grown-up life. Where do they line up? Where does allowing yourself in the weird hobby in an unjudgmental space, how does that help that grown-up you? How does this play self help this grown-up self? And where is the boundaries that we wanna put around the child self, the innocent self, the imagination self, the play self? Where are the boundaries that keep that space clear of judgment, clear of guilt, clear of shame? That is what we're looking at with Saturn at 6 degrees. So the sesquil quadrant has really our deep emotions, Scorpio emotions, betrayal, guilt, shame. That is looking for truth. It's looking for truth in the emotional space. And while it's doing that, Saturn is trying to build these boundaries around our innocent imagination play self. And so those 2 things have to work together. The sun will be making a biquintal to the moon at the same time. So really lighting up that truth space, that emotional truth space, so that we can see the guilt, the shame, all of the things, the betrayal, the hide it from everyone. I don't trust anyone with my idea. We're going to be able to see those things. We're going to be able to see the truth of how we feel. Now, that can be bringing up some stuff because not a lot of people like sitting in the guilt and the shame. Not a lot of people can find a place to understand that the guilt and the shame is a cloud giving them information about what's going on, but it's not actually who they are as a person. And that's one of the things to remember is that Scorpio transmutes and it can feel guilt and shame. It eats it for breakfast and then it turn it into the energy of the day. And this is this combination of understanding that the self-betrayal that comes from repressing your joy and your play nature as we grow older, that really does play into your ability to find a long-term adult job or situation that works for you, because we all are still gonna have this inner child inside of us wanting what it wants. This can be something that is triggered like, maybe just in your body, like, Saturn at 6 degrees is going to add a little bit of, what are your habits? What is your health? Especially in the gut, right? Aries, gut, mental health as well, all right? So, where are the boundaries that keep your mental health safe in regards to being able to do the thing that's fun, being able to do the fun, pleasurable thing that your inner child would love? Where are the boundaries around that? Where do you keep your own inner child safe so that any kind of betrayal, shame, guilt feelings from the outside don't cross that barrier as truth about who you are as a person? And the sun lighting up those feelings, that is the component that could hurt a little bit. But the reason you're getting that information is so that you can actually find the truth in where you allow other people's opinions of the thing, the fun thing, to stop you from doing it, to make you feel shameful about it. And with the moon at 21 degrees of Scorpio, it is gonna be in the 3rd house in the sky when it around 4 o'clock when this is all happening, and that might make it a little bit easier to be able to have these conversations, to be able to really express these things, or at the very least, if you're not feeling comfortable expressing them, being able to think them through. Watch out for being a bit stubborn in that thought process, and also watch out for Scorpio and Aries kind of energy, especially when we're dealing with a Sagittarius degree, it can be a bit righteous in knowing what it knows. And you might have to dig a little bit deeper to be able to see it. The sun helps because it's shining its light on it, but it can, yeah, it can be a little bit difficult to get to that truth sometimes. Now, 8:05 PM is the last aspect. The moon makes a quintile to Pluto. It's really trying to show you, like, that embracing the authentic shadow is where you get to find this empowering acceptance. Pluto is power and fear. In Aquarius, we're dealing with evolution, we're dealing with revolution, we're dealing with seeing things from a different perspective and being a bit of a fucking weirdo. 5 degrees is a Leo degree. So it is about the expression of our authentic truth. It's the expression of the weirdo. It's the expression of the weird creative project that we've decided is something we fear. And this quintile is saying if you actually organize all of the information and feelings and stuff that you've been looking at over the last week or so, what you're actually going to find is there's power in that. And that the acceptance and the building of the boundaries around that side of you, that precious imagination, inner child side of you, so no one can affect. You know what? Don't you want to tell me that it's shameful to play with dolls at age of 40? I don't care, because I like it. You're gonna tell me that I should be ashamed that my favorite thing to do on a Saturday morning is watch cartoons and eat candy at 9 AM? You know what? Shame me for it, I don't care. That's what this aspect wants. That is what this energy wants. That is really what Pluto in Aquarius wants, because the more that we align and connect with ourself and we see that being different, being weird, being authentic has absolutely nothing about it to fear, then we stop fearing people and things that are different to us. And then we become the Aquarius energy of collective understanding and support. That's what I've got for you. I hope you have a nice week. I'm always happy to grab an email from someone if you're not sure of how I can help you. If you'd like my assistance, you can find all of the details for my appointments in my description on my website or on any of the socials. I am the Explicit Empress. Thank you for your support. And as always, stay weird.